Hello. And the final testimony sharing for this morning here. And so I think for a little context as to what I'm going to share this morning, I think it is going to be about why Taiwan Mission is so important to me and why I have gone on it so many years. So for a little bit of context, this past May, we went on a treat with Harvest Church in New York, in northern New York. And one day over lunch, we started talking about missions and our upcoming mission trips that we had planned. And a few members from the Harvest Church shared about their planned trips to the Philippines and street evangelism in the Bay Area and also in New York City. And then our church shared about the work that we had been doing, which included things like going to the Philippines with Metro Child, prayer walks, what we're planning to do this summer. So we talked about our focus on equipping and teaching and sending out our youth on trips like Kyrgyzstan, Joshua Generation, Taiwan Mission, and how some of these trips actually had been done for many, many years. There was one person who was sitting at our table, and I could tell that he was waiting to ask a question, right? And the question was, isn't all of this super expensive? Isn't it super time-consuming? How do you guys know that the work that you're doing internationally is actually effective? What is your return on investment, ROI, for those who are into investing, right? And then why do you guys even continue to do it? So as someone that has gone on missions many times in the past years, so when the church started, we had a mission called Brooklyn Mission. That was one of the first ever missions we ever sent out. I went on that for the youth. I went to Portugal with our worship team to lead worship there. And then, of course, I've been to Taiwan many, many times. So I'm well aware of how expensive mission trips really are, how much vacation time you need to give up, the physical energy you need to invest, battling jet lag. And at times, I also ask myself the question, why do I keep going year after year, right? As James shared before, if we didn't have enough people, right, as Joseph has shared, if we didn't have enough people, we're going to cancel it, right? And so in my mind, I know everybody's like, oh, that's terrible. But in my mind, I'm like, oh, after so many years, I finally get a break, right? So for me, maybe that was a good ending point. But I feel like also as a Christian community at times, the question that he asked about mission, like, why do you do it? Sometimes is usually never spoken aloud, right? It's a little bit taboo. People say, you know, you never ask why you do missions, right? Isn't it a part of the Great Commission? Even in 2 Corinthians 4:17, it says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." Or in Romans 8:18, it says, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us," right? So when we know of the suffering that Jesus went through for our salvation, or even the persecution that a lot of apostles or disciples went through, as Christians, we maybe feel a little bit sheepish, right? A little bit ganga to ask these questions about earthly possessions, right? To think about time and money as things that we're not willing to give up to God, right? And it says specifically that the things that we're giving up here are very small in comparison to the treasures that we're laying in heaven. So if we start to count the cost, I think to myself a lot of times when I think about how much money has been spent on airline tickets to Taiwan or, you know, on mission trips, on traveling, etc., right? You think, as you start to add it up, you think you're starting to be a little bit stingy, right? A little bit 小气, right? As believers, do we think we're even allowed to count the costs that we put forward for when God calls us, right? For when we serve? Or are we really called to just blindly follow and do whatever God is calling us to do, right? Or if there are times where we hesitate to answer the call of God, do we feel a little bit guilty, right? When God tells us to go on missions and we're like, I don't know, that will cut into my vacation time, right? Do we feel a little bit guilty? I think the answer to that question, when I had been praying about it and asking God about it, right? The answer to the question should actually be no, right? We shouldn't feel guilt about sometimes when we hesitate. Because we see in Luke 14, when Jesus was actually teaching his disciples, right, about what the cost is to follow him as a disciples, it specifically says that, you know, when somebody is building a tower, if they are halfway through building the tower and suddenly realize they ran out of money, everybody's going to laugh at them, right? They're going to be like, how could you be so stupid to start and not have enough to finish it, right? It also talks about a king who, before they prepare to go into battle, right, they're going to think about whether or not they can win that war. If they can't win the war, what they're going to do is actually go ahead and broker for peace first, right? So Jesus actually tells us it's okay to count the cost of what it means to be his disciples, right? That we don't necessarily need to not know the cost and just blindly follow. But it's also important to note that right after, Jesus immediately follows up, right, with this one line that says, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples, right? So we can count the cost, but in order to be his disciples, in knowing what that cost actually is, we must also be willing to lay it down. So I think to bring it back to this Taiwan mission, right? So yes, missions are often expensive. It's often time-consuming. It is very physically tiring, but why do we continue to do it, right? What is the actual return? What is the actual effectiveness as to why we continue to do it year after year? So this is actually my 14th Taiwan mission trips over the course of 18 years. So that also includes a 3-year break due to the pandemic. So if you look at the pictures in the lobby as you walk into the church, right, there's actually 2 pictures there, right? One of them is from our first ever Taiwan mission trip to Henzhuan. So it's hard to imagine that that actual photo was taken 18 years ago and that all of the campers there are at least 25 years old or older. So none of them are actually children anymore. But when I look back at those photos from 2008, there are some students where I can actually recall still their English names, right? And that is how deep their impression on me is. So this year, we actually returned to the same 2 churches that we went to last year, and in Taipei and Kaohsiung. And in both camps, there are about 60 students in each one. So really in total, about 120 students and 50 Taiwan coworkers, in addition to our team of 9. At the first camp, I worked with the oldest students, which Joseph shared before, right? Which is also sometimes the toughest group. So they are often too cool, and it's much harder to motivate them to participate in group activities. And so when you work with the youngest students, there's not a lot of energy because you use it all in controlling their behavior. When you work with the oldest students, you lose all of your energy because you have to be extra enthusiastic to get them to participate, right? So some years, after 14 different trips, I do actually find myself dreading teaching the oldest class at times, right? Because a lot of times they're not as cute, right? They don't do fun things. And a lot of times they just look at you like you're very awkward, right? And so I sometimes don't want to teach them. But this year, when I found out that I actually was assigned the oldest group in Taipei, group 5, instead of feeling dread, I felt the Lord actually place in my heart a feeling of hope. So these were the students that the Lord was asking me to pour into and giving me an opportunity to influence these students during an especially formative period of life. So I think a lot of times when you go in with the attitude that, you know, maybe these older kids won't really like me, or maybe these older kids won't remember me if I come back again, right? But really what they are is that they're waiting with anticipation for you to love on them, right? They're waiting for you to reach out a hand and engage with them. So when the Lord put this on my heart, right, I really adjusted my attitude to make sure that I could connect with my students from the very first day of camp. So I spent the time to learn what they like to do. So whether that is what songs they like to listen to, right? Whether that is K-pop or C-pop or whatever that might be, what TV shows they like to watch, what games they like to play, what they do in their free time, right? And then spent a lot of time just talking with them about their lives and also playing games with them, right? And by the 3rd day, which seems very, very short, there was no longer any more shyness, and even some of this coolness that they had melted away, right? And I could see all of them enthusiastically dance and sing. One thing that really stood out to me, so at the end of the first camp, we had some time to share with the coworkers about what we had learned from the Lord that week, and to share about what the Lord had put on our hearts. And one Taiwan coworker shared a story with all of us, right, about how she had served in a very similar camp and conference when she was young. and that after leaving, she actually hadn't thought much of the experience. She just was a little bit depressed, right? She left and was like, I didn't see everybody saved. There was no life-changing moment. What was the purpose of me even going there, right? So a little bit, feeling like her time was maybe wasted, right? But fast forward 20 years, right? So 20 years had gone by, and there was somebody that ran up to her either at church or another conference and, was so enthusiastic, so grateful, and was thankful. And this woman was a little bit confused. She was like, do I know you? Like, how am I connected to you, right? And what the woman shared was, it was actually somebody that this coworker in Taiwan had poured into 20 years ago, had led to Christ, had become a cell group leader, had led this other woman to Christ, right? So essentially, 2 generations of Christians from this one event, right? And so for me, when I heard that, right, it reminded me that when we plant one seed, walking away from it, right, and through the work of the Lord and many other people along the way, there's an opportunity for that one seed to turn into a full garden, right? You never know the impact of what one life coming to Christ will do. So when I look back at the question that was asked, which is, why do we go on Taiwan missions for 18 years? What is its return? What is the actual effectiveness of it, right? One of the coworkers in Kaohsiung actually asked me the same question. She wanted to know how much our plane tickets cost to go to Taiwan. And when I had shared the amount, right, and she converted it into new Taiwan dollar, she realized and was very shocked how much it costs for us to actually go to Taiwan. It's probably, if I was to do the math, probably like 5 months rent for one of them. They were saying it as a 1-bedroom in Kaohsiung, they could actually do 5 months rent with 1 plane ticket, right? And then, as you probably think, like maybe even James shared before, how many times is too many times to go on Taiwan mission? So as I said before, I was thinking even maybe this year, if it was the last year, maybe that would be enough. But this coworker's testimony actually reminded me what the purpose of Taiwan Mission is, right? And it is that our hope and desire is for that one seed to be planted in every child and every coworker's heart. And even though we're not there 24/7 or week after week to be able to cultivate this seed or tend to the seed, we know that our work with the local churches will see that these seeds be planted in good soil and continue to grow. So there might not be a 100% return rate, right? I think we always, as Asians, aim for 100% success rate, right? Or we may never know the actual figure that comes from it, but we know that the angels in heaven will rejoice when one sinner turns and comes back to the Lord, right? So this year at the end of the first camp, during the sharing that I talked about before, when all of the Taipei coworkers were sitting together, I usually keep at least 1 copy of the team photo and 1 copy of my group photo in my phone. So 2008 was when, not 2008, 2018, I believe, was the year that we started working with this church in Taipei. So I pulled up the photo and I started looking at it. And I looked at one of the students in the photos and I was like, this child looks very, very familiar. Why is that? Then I look up and then I look to my right, and the coworker sitting next to me was the child in that photo, right? So I think that was the Lord's confirmation and affirmation for me, right? That as long as we continue to do the work and continue to plant the seeds, He will send other people as well to do the tending to the seeds and also to do the harvesting. So as we shared before, at the second camp in Kaohsiung, we ended up losing 1 day due to Typhoon Danis. So when we had heard that a typhoon was coming, I think a lot of us began panicking a little bit, right? We began praying that the English camp would not be affected because of how important that first day of camp was. So unfortunately, the city of Kaohsiung ended up declaring a typhoon day, which is very similar to our snowstorm day here in America, which was no school and no classes. So we weren't able to ask the students to come to the camp because last year in August in Kaohsiung, they actually had a pretty big typhoon that they were not very prepared for. There were actually a lot of damage that occurred, and I think there's a lot of anger that school and classes are still taking place. So for caution reasons, this year we ended up canceling the first day of camp. I know that as I know that many team members, as James shared, were worried that with one day less to teach, it would be actually very hard to connect with the students and that we wouldn't be able to have the impact we want to have on the children, right? However, despite all of these worries, we didn't see that the Lord's impact was diminished in any way. And by the end of the second day of camp, all of the children, even with only 2 days, were singing and dancing all of the songs at full volume, right? And as we were leaving, many of the students and teachers wanted to know whether or not we'd be coming back next year. So I know that the Lord had already begun moving in their hearts, even with only 2 days, that we could see the impact that the Lord was having on these children. So as I shared last year, there's never a Taiwan Mission that is the same. The team members, the students, the helpers will always change, but we serve a never-changing God who is always faithful, and for that, I'm always grateful for the opportunity to serve him. So to close out today, I just want to thank everyone for your relentless prayers, your financial support through fundraising, your encouragement to send out a group of young people to do the work that the Lord is calling. And while only a small handful are maybe sent out on each trip, right, it does take a full army of God for the gospel to be shared to the ends of the earth. So with that, thank you everyone here for your support for Taiwan Mission. And that is it for Taiwan Mission sharing this morning.